Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Live from the Blue Seats. That's producer JL coming at you with a solo podcast here today. Recording this on election day. It's definitely one of those days where everybody's feeling some type of anxiety, but we're not going to talk about that. Uh, so, the Rangers. Let's get away from all that politics stuff and let's talk about the New York Rangers, the hockey team that, if you're listening to this, more than likely root for. So far, they've looked pretty good. I could tell you that much right now. Granted with a couple of hiccups here and there, like that loss against the Capitals. I mean, they were able to take down the Ottawa Senators and then also defeat the New York Islanders pretty convincingly. Um, on Sunday, the Senators game was on Friday, and then they had played the Capitals that previous Tuesday. And I guess with the Capitals game, um, it was just kind of like just one of those duds that they were going to end up having. I mean, it's kind of bound to happen at some point. But at the end of the day, they were able to bounce back and look really good against a very feisty Ottawa team. One of the things that a lot of people tend to forget is that Ottawa, even though they're not exactly, a barn burner, so to speak, they're a very tough team to play against. And the Rangers have handled them pretty well over the years. But there always seem to kind of have that edge, and obviously that starts with Brady Tkachuk being the captain. So that kind of reflects into that style of play. And then you had your 5-2 win against the New York Islanders. Granted, the Islanders were, or they are, let's just say, pretty. What's the word I'm looking for? Let's just say injured. They fielded Bridgeport on the ice the other day. But either way, 5-2 is a pretty convincing sign of a pretty good win. And then they have the Buffalo Sabres coming up on Thursday, and then they play Detroit, Winnipeg, and then San Jose. And then after that, they have 2 days off, and then they have their West Coast trip to Seattle, Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, and then they come back home on the 25th against the Blues the week of Thanksgiving. So, just I don't want to get into the games too much. Obviously, we saw the return of Jimmy Vesey. Matt Rempe sent back down to Hartford. We all kind of expected that, so to speak. There was some shuffle with the lines. Mika Zibanejad played with Panarin and Lafreniere, and he looked okay. I mean, he didn't look terrible. Mika, I mean, see, the thing with Mika is, and this is gonna lead into what I want to talk about is, uh, Mika Zibanejad is shooting less, and that's a problem. And Dave had written about this on the website, but I wanted to echo that sort of sentiment. So they put Mika up. Well, first they actually lessened Mika's time with Kreider and Smith. Uh, and obviously Mika had made his kind of, somewhat objection made known into an article written by Larry Brooks of the New York Post. Um, but if there's one thing that is missing about Mika, granted he was never one to be a puck possession guy or a major, play driver, as Dave said, you know. But one of the things he's been very good at is essentially he's very good on the rush, and it works very well with Chris Kreider. And um, one of the things that he's been consistently been able to do is not only shoot the puck, but also just kind of it's not more or less a play driving. There just seems to be there was a tenacity to his game that and I don't want this to sound like I'm just totally dunking on the guy. I still like the guy. I still think he's going to be very effective for the Rangers. I said this before, but um clearly you can see that he's not shooting as much, and it's showing on the score sheet. I mean, even up until last year, where he was kind of at a bit of a low. I can't remember the number of goals that he scored last season. Maybe it might help me if I look at that. But you can definitely tell, and you can hear my keyboard. Thank you very much. But you can definitely tell that he wasn't exactly the same. Even on the power play, he was a bit off, so to speak. You know, Mika, if I'm looking at this correctly, is only 2 seasons removed from a 40-goal season. He had a 41-goal campaign in 2019-20. That's when he really sort of kinda took off, you know, and then he scored 24 in 2021. That was the COVID-shortened season, and then he scored 30, um, in 21-22, and then he scored 39 in 22-23. And then he hit 26. So not too far off from his career totals on average, but there was a lot less assists and way less points. He measured out at about 72 points last season, and in the two previous seasons, he went past 80 points. One was 81, and the other one was 91. And so I think what's happening is that I think there was it's either a slight regression or those years between 2020 and 2022 were, you don't want to call them a fluke, but they definitely got him paid. But either way, Mika's shooting less and he's looked less noticeable on the ice. Now you can say a lot of those goals that he scored were on the power play, and that's fine. Be a power play merchant at this point. Give me something, and it doesn't seem like he's getting used to that, or he's not really living up to that. And also, too, we've also talked about how his role is essentially changing. It's strange. The first two rounds of the playoffs last year or last season against Carolina, against Washington, very noticeable. And I guess his game was kind of able to fit that. Even up until the conference final run in 22, it looked awesome. That whole postseason just looked awesome. You're not really seeing much of that. Now I don't know how much of that is either coaching or it's the system. Who knows? But Mika's shooting less and pucks aren't going in, and it's beginning to kind of, you can see it on the ice. And just like he doesn't look like he's having fun. Doesn't look like he's enjoying himself. Now, this could all just be, excuse me. This could all just be uh, you know, just me pulling stuff out of my rear end. But but there is something off about him. And Dave had mentioned that not only is his role changing, he's getting a lot more now. He's getting a lot more defensive responsibility assignments um against tougher opponents, obviously, where you're first line center getting paid like a first line center. Then, you kind of get that sort of task. Um but he's shooting less, and it's kind of different. Like, he used to be able to just rip it and one would go in, or even on the power play, he'd be able to find, a corner and rip it through. But it just kind of seems like that's not really happening lately. And again, I don't want to blame all this on Mika. I don't know what's going on with his health. I don't know what's going on, and I don't want to sound like I'm ripping the guy, but you could tell something's off, you know? Um, and it, it's it's strange because Dave talks about, even though he was never, you know, a puck driver or a major puck possession type of guy, and that he's fluctuated in effectiveness. There have been times where he could take over a game, and I'm not saying that he should do that every time, but it just kind of seems like on a lot of nights he's just not really noticeable. Defensively, fine. It seems like his defensive metrics are really good. He's still very responsible. He still moves very well. It's not like he's loafing, but the thing is that if I'm Chris Drury, I can find, you know, a center who can do the defensive responsibility for that for probably $6 million less. When you're paying a guy 8 and change to, you know, essentially be the top guy, you want more than just 10 points in 11 games and just 6 at 5 on 5. Now, do I sound like I may be asking a lot? Maybe. But at the same time, you have other teams with top flight players. Jack Eichel comes to mind. Alexander Barkov comes to mind. And I'm not saying that I want Mika to do the exact things that those guys do, because those guys have their own skill sets in their own right. But we know that there is someone in this Mika Zibanejad that can be a guy for this team to kind of elevate his play and be the guy that he was a couple seasons ago. Now, I may just be ranting into the wind right now, but I'm reading what Dave says here is that he's shooting less. He scored 39 goals and got 91 points in his 22-23 season. That year, he shot 250 times on goal. Last season, as he started out with Laviolette, he dropped that total to 221. Now, at the time of this publication of this article, which is listed as November 5th, he has 22 shots in 11 games, and that's going to go down to 164 on the year if he keeps up the pace. So that would be his lowest since 14-15. So that would have been when he was an Ottawa Senator. Just about, yes. It would be about when he was an Ottawa Senator. So, granted, Panarin's shooting more. Maybe that's balancing it out. But as much as Mika's doing well on the defensive side, you kind of want more offensively from a guy that you're paying 8.5 mil and change. It's who knows. And maybe we see some improvement between now and, like Dave says, between the Black Friday game, because that's usually the barometer, because you're about 20 games in by that time, or just about 20 games in, more or less. And my barometer, for me personally, my barometer is just a little bit after the first week of December. And I know I mentioned this on another podcast, is that, the Rangers had their turnaround under Gallant the year he got fired, or the season before he got fired. Actually, it was the same year he got fired, but it was the season they lost to the Devils in the playoffs. They were awful. And they were able to really, and even through the end of November, they were not great, and they were able to really turn it around. Then that St. Louis Blues game at Madison Square Garden really, sticks out to me the most. So that's my barometer, because anything can happen, and obviously you'd have to really go on a heater at that time, which the Rangers did, thankfully, even though the playoffs didn't end so well. But with Mika, that's going to be my barometer for him. And obviously, it's a bit different with players than it is with the team itself as a whole. So maybe he may heat it up after that threshold, but you kind of get a pretty good idea by either the Black Friday game or maybe the first or second week of December what type of season somebody's going to have, because you're essentially in the thick of it. And then obviously, next thing you know, 2 months later, you're in a playoff race, depending on where you're at in the standings. So I from on a lot of podcasts and also privately and even publicly too, it kind of sounds like I'm really writing him a lot. And yeah, I could be, but that's because I want him to do well. I love Mika Zibanejad as a player on this team. I like what he can bring to this team. I know that he can bring a lot, because there have been many times where I've gone to Madison Square Garden, and even watching on TV, just watching Ranger games in general, I've seen him be the player that is worth 8.5 and change, you know? And it's so strange. I don't know if it's coaching. I don't know if it's him, because he did, or maybe it's just regression. Who knows? It's just hard to pinpoint because he's not that old. I mean, I think he's about maybe a little bit younger than I am, and I'm 31. Not old, Just so you know, Dave's old. No, I'm kidding. But you would hope that the guy that you're paying all that money to can basically hold on. There've been many players that have been massively successful and past their age 30, 31 season. And I get it, not everybody's the same, but talent is always going to be there. So, and he still has it, and I want him to do well. I've always liked Mika Zibanejad, and I want him to continue to do to get better, and I want him to reach that status because there's a couple of games come to mind. Obviously, you have the 5-goal game against the Capitals. That's arguably his best game ever on the ice. You had there was this stretch of time in the COVID shortened season where he just went on a heater from about like he had gotten diagnosed with COVID, was kind of iffy in the beginning, and then he just kind of hit this stride and just took off. And it sucked because the Rangers didn't make the playoffs that season, but he could have. If he did, I think they probably would have won a round or two. They probably wouldn't have made it far enough because the team was wholly suspect for in many ways more than one that year, as evident by what happened at the end of that year. But he was still, he just it's just there's this sort of like confidence that he has, um, and it's like you can tell when he's on it and when he's not because he's a tall guy, he's a strong guy, he's like 6'2", he's about the same frame as Alexander Barkov, and you see him, like you can notice him. He's not somebody that even though someone can put up points, he's not gonna, hide in the bushes. No, you'll notice Mika Zibanejad when you see him. And the one game I think of was when the Rangers dropped 9 on Philly, excuse me, during the COVID season. Um, and he was the guy. I think he scored a hat trick that day and I got a couple of points. Was all over the ice. Granted, the Flyers not so great, but at the same time, he was still very noticeable. And that's the season prior, the season before, uh, the COVID pandemic closed it down. We were making a pretty good case that he was the MVP of the team outside of Artemi Panarin, and both those guys were playing phenomenally well, and it was nice to see because those two guys on their own were really holding this team together and were going to will this team into a spot. I think I forget how many games out they were um before the pandemic came and shut everything down, but I think they had a pretty sizable winning streak. It was about 7 or 8 if I remember correctly. And the momentum that they had was incredible. That team was determined, and I think if they had played out that season, in a normal fashion, I think they probably squeak into the final spot. Whether or not they would have done anything deep into the playoffs or not is besides, you can't really tell. But Mika Zibanejad and Artemi Panarin were really carrying that team. And, Pavel Buchnevich to a degree too. The offense was really clicking. They were really putting the puck into the back of the net at the time. And obviously, COVID sucked, but the silver lining from all that is that, you get eliminated in the play-in round, you get the first round pick, and now we have arguably probably the most elite offensive player this franchise has had in a long time in Alexis Lafreniere, at least homegrown. So, but my point is though, is that uh Mika Zibanejad is shooting less. There's no need to panic right now. Um, but you want to go back. You want to see him do what his contract is paying him to do. And maybe that's part of probably why a lot of us are disappointed because if Mika wasn't making that much money or maybe the contract was a bit movable, so to speak, then maybe it wouldn't be so much of a problem. But the thing is that he's making first line center money or equivalent to first line center money. And not to sound like you have FOMO because we used to do this a lot with the wingers that we would have on the team as the Rangers, but you would see guys like like a Panarin type of even Panarin himself. You would see guys like that, or like a Patrick Kane, or just other teams that have these very dynamic forwards on wing that would just kill it. And finally, the Rangers ended up getting one of their own in Artemi Panarin, and now you have Alexi Lafreniere, and now we have a bushel of talent on the wing. And now we're kind of getting that feeling about the center depth. Vincent Trocheck, great. Stumbling a little bit, but still performing very well this season so far. Philip Hedl, a revelation. Absolutely killing it. Sam Carrick, doing the job that Barclay Goodrow can do, but for like $3 million less. It's great. But now you kind of want, is it fair to compare Mika to like a Jack Eichel, Connor McDavid, Alexander Barkov? Well, if you're paying him that kind of money, I mean, I know McDavid makes way more than he does, probably about 2 or 3 more million, maybe more. But that's what we're paying him for, and he's shooting less. It's a little concerning, but there's no need to panic just yet. Um, but he's looked a lot better playing with Panarin and Lafreniere. Maybe that might take some time to kind of gel a little bit, although I never really agreed that Panarin, and it's weird. I never understood why Panarin and Zibanejad never meshed, and maybe it's the different play styles, so to speak. Panarin is a play driver. Mika is not. Mika is the type of guy who can defend very well, and then hopefully the winger can come in and do work. And so far, when Kreider, Zibanejad, and Riley Smith have been together, we've seen an improvement in just kind of Mika's all-around play on the ice. But at the same time, he's still not shooting as much. Again, I could just be ranting into the ether right now, but I just hope that we can see some improvement. And or maybe in the role that he's in right now, maybe he can find a way to flourish in the space that he's being given, you know, because the way that he's currently being deployed before being put with Panarin and Lafreniere is essentially operating as the de facto third line. You look at the way that the lines were set up before the game against the Islanders. They ended up getting outshot against the Senators, which is what caused Laviolette to make the change. But um, if you look at the way that they were set up, Panarin, Trocheck, Lafreniere, that's line one. And I hope that we go back to that at some point, because I think that's key. And then you had Cooley, Hedel, Kako, who at 5-on-5 are ridiculous. And I don't know if this number still holds up. They might have been scored on at this point on 5-on-5, but that line has just been ridiculously good at 5-on-5. And then you have Kreider, Zibanejad, and Smith. Riley Smith has been phenomenal. He's been really good. Uh, oh, my phone's ringing. Thank you for calling me, random number. Uh, Riley Smith has been good. Riley Smith it's been awesome for this team so far. He's kind of fitting a role that they lacked last season, kind of having a sort of rugged-ish type winger. And he looks good with Vincent Trocheck. That's chemistry that goes back when they played for the Panthers. But at the same time, you know, you just want more for Mika. That's it. His role is changing, maybe in this new sort of uh, deployment that Laviolette has him in. I trust that Laviolette and the coaching staff can get as much out of Zibanejad as he can give, but it's up to him to make sure that he puts it out there. So, anyways, enough about Zibanejad. So, this is not a I hate Mika Zibanejad thing. I just know that he'll be fine, but maybe his role ends up changing a little bit here and there. And kudos to Dave for posting that. There's a lot of good stuff on this blog, and if you're listening to this, you more than likely read, which is great. And we thank you for that. We thank you for taking the time out to read, taking the time out to check out our stuff. Tyler does great stuff with the recaps. Hope does a great job with the Wolfpack, and just everybody on our team does a phenomenal job, and I want to give them kudos, of course. So I want to touch on again. This is sort of thing that kind of comes out every so often with Matt Rempe, and I don't like it. And again, I have to agree with Dave. This was posted on the 1st of November. So if you don't know, Ken Campbell essentially wrote a hit piece on Matt Rempe, calling him an embarrassment to hockey. Now, if you don't know who Ken Campbell is, you are a very lucky person. Ken Campbell used to write for the Hockey News, but for some reason doesn't write for them anymore. Geez, I wonder why. You know, uh, I'm not going to sit here and question this man's integrity, but let's just say Ken Campbell doesn't exactly come up with the greatest takes. And I I don't know the details behind it, but I wouldn't be surprised if I were to find out that he was let go unceremoniously. That's how much I think of his stuff. I used to follow him, and I used to like the stuff that he wrote because I thought he was a reputable reporter. But just from a lot of the stuff that I've seen as of late, and just kind of a lot of the things that he's posted on Twitter has kind of pulled me back, and I've had to unfollow him. And one of the latest things is that he basically called Rempe an embarrassment to hockey. So, okay, there's a lot to digest here. Um I just don't understand. This league has seen some of the biggest scumbags that have put on skates over the last, you can even say, 5 to 10 years, okay? You can talk about Tom Wilson, you could talk about Matt Cook, you can talk about even Brad Marchand to a degree, you could talk about Radko Gudas. All those guys are repeat offenders, especially Tom Wilson, right? But for some reason or another, just because of how Matt Rempe came into the league last year, all of a sudden Matt Rempe is an embarrassment to hockey? I don't understand. I really don't. Yeah, I might have some bias because I'm a Ranger fan. Fine. If you want to say that, fine. I understand that. But at the same time, if you kind of look at it separating yourself from the fandom, you know, the kid is 22 years old, okay? And the only thing that he's probably done over the span of what you want to say is his body of work is that he elbowed he elbowed Jonas Siegenthaler last season, and he hit him with the elbow, which was rightly so um, suspended for it. Okay, fine. Yeah, he should have. It was the right call to suspend them for that hit. But if you're talking about the fights coming into the league, especially on the Stadium Series game, and fighting Matt Martin for the first time, fighting the enforcer for the Blue Jackets, whose name seems to escape me for some reason, for just hitting hard, um, he's hasn't done anything that any other fourth liner has done. He hasn't purposely injured anybody. He hasn't targeted people's heads multiple times. Matt Cook, Tom Wilson, Brad Marchand. No, he's just a big kid who is trying to find out what to do with his body. Matt Rempe is a big kid. He's like 7 feet tall on skates. Okay. And uh how is that an embarrassment to hockey? It's not his fault that when he tries to body check somebody, that they just end up running into his elbow or they running into his arm when his elbow's down, mind you. Okay? He hits people normally. Granted, there are instances where you can tell he's raw and is trying to find a way to work around his body, but that's with any kid that comes up into the NHL, not just Matt Rempe, you know. If you look at any of the hits outside of the Siegenthaler one where Matt Rempe goes to hit somebody, it's the same thing with Truba. His elbow's down, okay? I love it how we have this sort of coda where we want hockey to go into the old school hitting hard this and that and the fourth, but then when you have guys like Jacob Truba and Matt Rempe who can do it and do it properly 99% of the time, all of a sudden it's an issue because he either plays for the Rangers or they just don't like the kid. Well, I'm sorry, it's not it's not his fault that he's 7 foot. That's to his advantage. It's worked out for the Rangers. Granted, he's not the perfect hockey player, and he was rightly suspended for that elbow on Siegenthaler. But at the same time, there's no other evidence that links to the fact that he's an embarrassment to hockey. He's just a kid on the fourth line trying to go through the motions and stick with the NHL. The kid worked hard over the summer to try and get his game up to a level where he can be competent. And even though he's back in Hartford, he's still learning and he looked decent for someone who apparently is an embarrassment to the game. What are you supposed to, what is a 7 foot on skates kid supposed to do? Is he supposed to lower his body? Boy, doing that might just hurt somebody even more if he tries to do that. You know? I don't understand it. Ken Campbell, what are you talking about? Why do you think that that's an embarrassment? And I'm willing to bet that you would praise Matt Cook and elevate Tom Wilson. And I'm sure you don't have anything. I don't want to give him any clicks or any looks, but I have read some of his stuff, unfortunately. And nothing on those guys. Maybe I don't know, but I don't see the same outrage from that you would from Matt Rempe. Granted, this might just be clickbait, and he needs people to read his crap. I said crap. Yes, I did. But at the same time, you're a reporter, okay? Quote unquote. People know who you are. All right? So maybe if you're trying to prove a point, maybe do it the right way as the old guys used to do, quote unquote, and actually maybe try to create, if you're going to try and flame the kid, at least try to come up with something that is fair in terms of trying to justify an argument. What I read from Ken Campbell's not fair. How can you complain about a kid who has 111 total NHL minutes? How is that an embarrassment to hockey? How? You have guys who are playing who have been involved in multiple crimes or who have been very involved in a lot of suspicious activity, and yet nobody says a damn thing about that. So you're going to tell me, as reputable as the source is, you're going to tell me Evander Kane is not an embarrassment to hockey? Seriously? You're going to tell me that Brad Marchand's repeated antics? Oh, well, we can't get mad at Brad Marchand. Oh, because he's good. Oh, so I guess that changes things. Right. It's kind of the same logic about Shohei Ohtani in Major League Baseball. Uh, nobody opens up, a word about Ohtani, or at least everybody likes to remain hush about it because he's the golden boy. Oh, Shohei Ohtani is suspiciously linked to the gambling thing. Oh, well, we're just going to throw his interpreter under the bus. But meanwhile, uh, anybody on the Mets is like one of the worst people in the world. Come on, give me a break. Seriously. Matt Rempe's 22 years old. He's trying to find his way into the league. Okay? He's not head hunting anybody. He's not breaking somebody's Achilles. And also too, oh yeah, oh hey, Radko Gudas. You want to talk about somebody that targets people? Oh, Radko Gudas, one of the number one enemies in terms in the NHL, just absolutely going after people, gooning it up on the ice. Okay, he's not an embarrassment to hockey. Tom Wilson, again, mentioning him again. He's like the NHL, and I'm sure Tom Wilson's a nice guy off the ice, but on the ice, total scumbag. Matt Cook, scumbag. But Matt Rempe is an embarrassment. Well, geez, I guess the whole bashing whoever plays for the Rangers is apparently gets you clicks, because the same thing happens with Jacob Trouba, and the same thing happens with I mean, Artemi Panarin had to have a legendary Rangers season last year for anyone to really notice him. And I'm not trying to say that as someone who's angry. I'm just trying to say it's true, because Panarin has consistently been one of the best wingers, not only for the Rangers, but just in the NHL in general. And it took only last season for people to really see that. Artemi Panarin is probably going to go down as probably one of the greatest Ranger free agent signings of all time. Mark Messier was a trade. So I don't understand this. I really don't. Look, there was one instance I was at this game. Um he it was Rangers Devils at the Prudential Center, and he basically ran. He's a truck, so he ran basically through Nathan Bastian, and Adam Edstrom was right behind them. And Edstrom's no slouch himself, which he's been phenomenal this year so far. And Nathan Bastian is way shorter, and Bastian's not a small guy by any means whatsoever. But he hit him. Was it a little late? Yeah, maybe. But at the same time, he didn't stick his elbow out. He was trying to hit the guy. It just so happens Rempe's bigger. Rempe gets kicked out of the game. Why? Why? Hits like that happen all the time where there's a fraction of a second or a second after the puck is there and they collide. Hockey's a collision sport. It happens. Okay? And you can tell when somebody's targeting somebody else's because more than likely the elbow's up because they're going to go and try and hurt somebody. Matt Rempe didn't do that, you know? I put together a lot of these videos whenever the Rangers do well. I put them together for YouTube and I go over the footage. And I've gone over a lot of Matt Rempe's shifts, you know? The kid's just playing hockey, man. He's just a big kid. What is he supposed to do? He can't make himself shorter, you know? If he tries to go down, he might hurt himself because then he's putting his head into jeopardy, you know? Oh, let me go down and lower my shoulder. Oh, you lower the shoulder, that might even be worse. You know? Come on. Ken Campbell, I'm sorry. You're an embarrassment. Okay? And I why would you want to denigrate and target a kid who is just trying to learn the game and just has had a couple of instances happen? Like I said, there have been way worse that has gone on in the NHL. And the reason why I like to point out Evander Kane is because the NHL essentially keeps it hush hush and he's still playing, you know? Not really has been made known. You've got players who are potentially grooming kids and cheating on their wives with reporters uh who work for the team that they play for. Is that not embarrassing? You have players who are having very suspicious activity with ladies of the night or ladies who you meet up with a bar or something like that and just magically disappear in the middle of a playoff run. You're going to tell me that's not suspicious? That's not an embarrassment to the game, Ken Campbell? Huh? Or what about Ty Domi running around and injuring Scott Niedermayer with sticking out his elbow? Or Scott Stevens, deliberately targeting people. Was that not embarrassing to the game? It's hard because those guys play hard. Matt Rempe plays hard. How is that any different? It's different because Matt Rempe's not actually trying to kill somebody. I don't know. It's just, you know, I guess maybe that's one of the problems with being chronically online. I've been lessening my usage as of late. I know many other of my colleagues have done the same. But why are you going to go after a kid who is not only still raw, but is just trying to fine tune some stuff? It's not abnormal to see that from a kid. It just so happens is that he's a huge kid. And then to make matters worse, the referees target him. Okay. Well, I was watching a clip the other day. Um, I think it was Panthers Islanders, but it basically involved Matthew Tkachuk. And obviously, Matthew Tkachuk is going to be Matthew Tkachuk, which is fine. And he's another guy. He's deliberately targeting people. Is that not embarrassment to the game? Like, come on. Anyways, Matthew Tkachuk goes in and he essentially cross-checks I think it was the Islanders goalie. It might have been Varlamov. Essentially cross-checks him like 3 times, just trying to battle in front of the net. And then uh is kind of in his way where you can kind of justify it to be interference, and they counted the goal. Meanwhile, I think this was against Utah. I might have been at this game. Matt Rempe is just standing there. Does not hit. I want to say it was Connor Ingram that was in net. It might have been Ingram or Vermelka, but I think this was against Utah. And his foot is in the crease, but he's not impeding progress. He's just big. And I think this is on the Victor Mancini shot, if I'm correct. But they called it back because it's Matt Rempe. Even during the playoff games that I went to when Rempe would play, you could see him being targeted. In the games that I'd go to when Rempe was out there, more than likely you could see he had a target on his back. So listen, Ken Campbell, please shut it. Okay? If you somehow magically hear this, I'll be more than happy to engage in conversation with you. Okay? And I don't mind when journalists or people who write about hockey call out somebody, but just be fair. Okay? We're getting into this age nowadays where all people want to do is try and, it's all about clickbait. You could make an argument back in the day. It's not like none of this stuff has never existed in the past, but at least to somewhat of a degree, these journalists would attempt to try and make an argument. All Ken Campbell is doing is complaining about a kid who is 22 years old and he's huge. That's it. And it fits into the whole Ken Campbell hasn't put out anything productive over the last who knows how long. It's like picking on a child. I wish people had more energy to do this against Tom Wilson, against Brad Marchand, against Radko Gudas. I mean, what was it? What was it? I was watching a game. It was Canadians Maple Leafs. Arbor Jacki, I like him as a player, but he's way dirtier than Matt Rempe is. And he basically, I think it was in retaliation for Patrick Laine getting hurt, if I'm remembering this correctly. I think it was against Toronto. And Arbor Jacki just essentially mean mugged somebody in retaliation. Is that not an embarrassment to the game? I don't know. And I think that with the rise of social media, and the sort of need to want to be seen, objective reporting has just kind of gone out the window, and people just want to be stupid for clicks. And it's very frustrating to see because it kind of denigrates the whole medium, because then that's what ends up filling up the space, and you don't want that. You know what I mean? So I'm not I'm just not a fan. Not a fan of Ken Campbell anymore. Um, the Hockey News is still a very reputable publication, even though a certain older, scorned former Ranger reporter is writing for them part time and is essentially writing about a current Ranger goaltender like he's a communist. Um, I still enjoy a lot of what the Hockey News puts together. They've been around for a while, and it's good that Ken Campbell's not associated. Ken Campbell is not associated with them anymore. Is that a hot take? I guess. I don't know. But it's like, what is a guy who is 6'9", 6'10"? What is he supposed to do? I mean, if the logic applies, then you're just gonna have to ban everybody who is super tall. Because if you're gonna play a collision sport, not everybody's the same damn height. Heads are gonna run into arms, especially if you're 6'10", for goodness sake. Come on. I don't understand it. And people will probably call me out on this or whatever if they hear it or think I'm crazy or find some way to deconstruct this argument or whatever. That's fine. But at the end of the day, why against a 22-year-old? It makes no sense to me. It really does not. There are better things that you can be doing with your time. And maybe this is the exact reaction that he wanted. Maybe I'm falling right into the trap because, again, like I said, everything's got to be clickbait these days. But I'll take the bait. Ken Campbell, you suck as a reporter. And I know that might sound very unprofessional for me, but if this was about somebody else who was also unfairly targeted, I'd say the same thing. You know, if Tom Wilson was a Saint and he was being targeted this way, I'd say the same thing too. But anyways, it's just stupid. And I really don't know what else to say. Ken Campbell, get your act together. No one's gonna want to hire you if you're just gonna do that. And maybe you don't. Maybe you don't want to get hired by anybody and just want to do your own thing. If that's the case, fine. Go into your space and leave us all alone. Okay? Because it doesn't seem like you're gonna really provide anything productive. Just going off of what I've seen on the timeline as of late. So, anyways, Sorry, I'm getting off my soapbox. I'm getting off my soapbox here. It's just it's you got to understand where I come from. I'm sort of an old school kind of guy. I like to be. I don't want to say fair and balanced because that's a that's a phrase that's used unfortunately by a news organization that's not exactly the most kosher or that really follows that mantra. But my general goal in life is just to try and speak with reason and just to try to be fair because I feel like you can get the best discourse that way. And I feel like that really taps into a lot of what people want. You know, you try to pander to the lowest common denominator and it ends up becoming this sort of like surface thing that does not last unless it's really outrageous to where people can remember it due to its outrageousness. But I feel like a lot of down the middle in terms of this hockey arguments and just trying to be fair, that really does go a long way. It's why, the best writers stay with their publications for a very long time, you know? Like you look at a lot of the Ranger beats outside of Larry Brooks. And not trying to knock Larry, but Larry has a penchant of being a bit crazy. But, if a lot of the Ranger beat, they like to stay down the middle, maybe a little too soft at times, but listen, they're somewhat fair for the most part. You look at the Mets beat, for example. Anthony DeComo is generally not trying to attack people. He's very down the middle, does ask a lot of tough questions. You know, Marty Noble, another one. Everybody loved Marty. He was an old reporter. It was the one that Anthony DeComo took over for MLB.com. God rest his soul. Marty Noble. Everybody loved Marty Noble. Marty Noble was very fair. You know, even broadcasters, for example, Gary Cohen, Keith Hernandez, Ron Darling. You know, Vin Scully, Sam Rosen, all those people in the media are very fair to the team that they're covering, but have also been critical, but not to the point where it's degrading. You know, there's a difference between criticizing for the sake of either frustration, but it comes from a genuine place, and then there's criticizing to be mean, and there's criticizing to be harsh, and there's criticizing to be unfair. And a lot of the ones who stay down the middle but can also criticize but be fair are the ones that are beloved the most, you know? And I feel like a lot of the older crew who have now divulged a lot of their takes onto social media or have begun to really have social media take over them have kind of adopted that, but it comes with this weird vitriol to it. Because if you take a listen to a lot of what some of these older people have to say, and I'm not saying everybody that's old falls into this because that's not fair, but Ken Campbell and like Stan Fischler just seem to be just kind of nasty. And yeah, Stan might say his whole thing about Igor is a joke, but there's a lot of vitriol behind that. That whole shtick that he has, which shout out to Mr. Cougar Colleen Camp. He parodies him very well on Twitter. He has the picture with him holding the thumbs up like that. That's phenomenal. Credit to you, Mr. Cougar Colleen Camp. That's fantastic. I always credit him as being one of the best follows on Ranger Twitter. But it's I don't want to say it is an excuse to try and stay relevant, but I feel like it is. I don't know. It's just I don't like to see, reporters going after players unfairly. And if Matt Rempe had been a total douche nozzle and was just out here headhunting, I'd call it out. You know, when Jacob Trouba, on the rare instance he does a hit that's a bit suspect, I'll call it out. Like for example, the whole thing with Trent Frederick in a Bruins game in front of the net where he whacked him in his head. He 100% deserved to get suspended for that. I think he only got a fine for that. But either way, he deserves some punishment for it because no matter how you try to justify it, you still swing your stick at a guy's head. So he rightly deserved to be suspended for that or fined for it, whatever. But he deserved to be punished for it, you know? So and then I'll mention the Rempe thing again. I was at that game, and even Rempe said it himself. He said that he thought that Siegenthaler was closer to the boards than he initially was, and that's why he kind of did what he did, but it still doesn't justify that he did it. But at the same time, that's not Rempe's game, and he hasn't done anything crazy outside of that. But anyways, I'm talking in circles here. But yeah, be fair. Be fair. So anyways, that's going to put a wrap on this podcast here today. Um I hope I was somewhat coherent today. It's been I'm recording this on election day, and no matter who you vote for, it's a very anxious day. Just historically, and so it's been very crazy along with, my job as well. So I hope that I was able to be somewhat coherent for you here today. So anyways, that'll put a wrap on this episode from Life for the Blue Seats. Hope you're all doing okay, and the next time we'll talk will be after the next couple of games, and we'll hopefully have the rest of the crew here at the Peanut Gallery and bring you some more Ranger content. So anyways, Producer JL signing off. Have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you're listening to this. And we'll see you on the next episode of Live from the Blue Seats. Let's go, Rangers.